Hello, and welcome to another British Cartographic Society Teatime Talk. My name is Chris Rebutis. I'm the coordinator for the Teatime Talks and today's chair. Today's speaker is Josie Wilson with her talk, The Child's Understanding of Their School Journey. So without much further ado, I will pass you over to Josie, where she'll give us what should be a fascinating talk.
Thank you very much, Christopher. I am going to take my video off because it's already told me that my internet connection is unstable. So that's marvellous. Thank you, BT. But while I just quickly introduce myself, I'll keep it on and I'll take it off as I go through. So thank you very much. Quite a few people here. I'm very impressed. Very generous of you to come and see me. That's very kind, and have a listen to what I've got to say for myself. I'm a lecturer at Sheffield Hallam University. I'm principal lecturer, I'm head of planning, deputy head of geography, and I'm also the departmental quality lead, so I look after all those policies. Part of my research that I do is to look at mapping and how children understand their journey to school. So I'm going to try and keep to plain English today because I understand there could potentially be a younger audience here, and not use too many big words, or if I look like I might try to explain them a bit too much, it's because I want to make sure everyone can enjoy hopefully what I've got to say for myself. Like I said, I am hoping to take the camera off because I'm worried about my internet connection.
Headset earphone. Headset earphone.
But you should be able to hear me still. If I can go into my PowerPoint, forgive me one moment while I chatter away to myself. So, child understanding of the school journey. What I want to do is just go through some of the work that I've done with young people, predominantly from the ages of 9 to 11. And I really want to understand their journey to school and how they get there and how they perceive their journeys. And so most of them, I think all my map work in here has been produced by the fine efforts of years 5 and 6 of primary school. Did I mention I'm a lecturer in geographical information systems, and so my research is around active travel, and I also teach that as well. I thought it would be really useful to offer some context. I tend to kind of just go straight into these things because I've studied it for so very long. My primary research and the things I'm doing are around children's understanding of their journey to school. I'm particularly interested in how they perceive what's around them. We call that cognitive mapping, or mental mapping is another term that's often used. I have a nice graph in front of me showing, this is from the Office of National Statistics, Department of Transport, just showing you how we've travelled in the last 25 years. Walking is, for primary and school altogether, as a percentage, is the most popular method of getting to school, the most popular mode, with caravan being the next most popular. Coming towards the bottom, we have bus, whether it's private or local bus, and then right at the bottom is the notion of actually cycling to school. I'll swiftly go through the data. It's just offering context, just to show you that walking still relatively low at about 44%. The journey to school, then looking quickly at primary and then secondary, and then we'll look at the maps, which is far more interesting. Just before COVID, there was actually a dip with walking in primary school, and sadly, driving young people to school seems to be slightly more popular. COVID's had a bit of an effect on that. We're seeing that going down, but again, they're very close to each other, considering the locality of schools to where people live at primary level. I would find rather disappointing that 20 years ago, actually, we did have higher numbers walking and less going by car. While I'm thinking primary, I thought I'll just pull up some data. So I do work with a company called ModeShift. ModeShift stars collect data. They have an accreditation, and they collect data from schools. And I was just going to pull up this notion of scooters. I'm sure if any of you have ever tried to get into work in rush hour and you've seen children going to school, there are more and more who are on scooters, and it's actually one of the more popular areas where young people would like to scooter. So the kind of my pink is the actual number that get to scooter to school, and the purple is actually the young people that would like to scooter to school, but for whatever reason don't. And that is actually one of my real life maps of a very happy person taking his scooter to school. Secondary, it does actually drop off quite a lot. We see this kind of divide going down. Secondary schools tend to be less of them and slightly further apart. So we kind of expect to see the buses to go up, and we are seeing that the private bus to school is actually going up. The local bus is becoming less popular. The use of the car is still quite popular, but there's a notable trend that walking is particularly popular in that age group. We have seen a very slight rise in cycling, but nothing significant. Okay, so my research, the far more important part. We know we need to get young people moving more. We know the obesity levels are getting higher and higher. 20% now of year 6 pupils are considered to be obese, which is shocking. So the work I'm looking at is how we get people to addressing how they travel and think about how they feel about that. So I go into schools. It has predominantly been around year 5 and 6, and I look at doing kind of electron mapping and cartography, understanding how we make maps. And then they have a light practical session where they basically are given the task of drawing their journey to school. And they get between 45 and 60 minutes to do that. They have the freedom to put on whatever they want onto their maps. They can express themselves in whatever they choose to do. I learnt my lesson. I now only let them draw on A4 and A3 size sheets of paper. Otherwise, there is always a couple in the class that will just find as much paper as they can, and they're actually quite difficult to analyse. And here is an example, one of those beautiful pieces of work that they've produced for me. From the work that I've done, I have previously had a postgraduate student that did work for me as well. I know that we have certain types of maps that come out, and there are kind of 4 basic types. There's the pictorial drawing, which is the first top left. So the participants show us where their house is, and they show where the school is, and they'll put in a little bit of additional information, maybe where a few other buildings are and some of the environmental features. The second one is schematic drawing, and this is really just a selection of lines. They have houses on, but it's sometimes unclear how they're connected. It's quite formulaic in the way the information is produced. It's obviously how the student understands the space that they're in. The third one, which is bottom left, again, we call them on-plan drawings with pictorial elements. So we see clear connections between the areas, very much from this bird's eye view, looking down onto the paper. And you can orientate it. You can kind of work out where things are, which is quite nice, kind of suggests they have a better understanding of what's around them. And then the fourth one are what I affectionately call plan drawings. Resembles a map with identical landmarks. They have just had a lecture from me on maps. They have very clear symbols and abbreviations, and generally the map is quite recognizable as a map. This one is still quite 3-dimensional, but you can understand, and it's how we kind of understand maybe a master map to look. So some of the things we've learned as we've done work with children, there are things in terms of the mapping elements. So we have to think about the symbology, think about what they're producing, what do the houses look like. They all identify that differently. I've put on the left an example of one of the young people that drove, and this was his attempt at a car. It's a very interesting looking car. The maps have all sorts of decisions around what the children decide to select and what they decide not to include. Also, they tend to think about how they simplify the information, because they've got a fairly constrained exercise. So they think about what they want to put on, what's important to them, what isn't important. And again, some of that might require combination. Increasingly, there's a lot of emphasis done, and that's often done through the use of colour. So they'll kind of do a black and white drawing and then use colour to make a point. This is my house. These are things that I look at. This is the green bit. These are the environmental bits. And we have thermal elements as well around the environment. So you often see additional things. You might get someone who actually draws a car, or an example where someone might draw houses, or this is where the dog barks, that scares me. So you sometimes get these little extra snippets to explain their journey. So let's have a go through some of these maps and have a look at what I've kind of tried to pull out the ones that have scanned best. I like this one. This is very, very colourful, really good key, explaining to me quite a linear route, but it's thoughtful. I can understand the direction that they take, and there's kind of points out. You have to really understand the legend on this one and kind of go across, but it has a clear route through. I suggest that they probably drive, because it's very linear and it follows path, and there isn't a huge amount of detail. The yellow makes me smile because it actually says muggers, so this is clearly an area they keep away from. This is much smaller, but that has some of the themes that we often see on some of the maps. So quite a lot of them have cemeteries marked up. These tend to resonate a lot, link with children quite a lot. I pulled this one out because it had two types of path. So it's got a very black straight line, but then there's kind of a more kind of train line going through, and it's not very often I see train lines on maps, even though, you know, there are very clear schools that I've gone to, but it shows a little bit more knowledge about maybe some of the transport modes available. This one provided a more linear approach. It's often how the young people think, my year 5s and 6. They start with the school, they put where their house is, and they basically kind of follow it like a snake around the map. And it's quite interesting, the things they pull out. So they've got the fields, some houses, here are the garages. But this one didn't have a lot of detail, and there are quite a few that often don't have a huge amount of detail. Again, we tend to find this when they get driven. They just haven't got that awareness of what's around them. Pop this one in. This was actually done on A3 size, and it's not often that someone actually fills the page. They wanted lots of information in here. There's lots around. So the school is at the top. Their home is actually at the bottom. It didn't particularly scan that well. They've got the parks. They've got kind of boxes representing houses because it was quite a built-up area. But it's really unusual to see a map quite so full. There's usually a lot of space around what they don't know, but they actually live quite close to the school. They have quite a good awareness of what's around them. This, if I was allowed to have favourites, would be my favourite. It's very pictorial. It's got a lot of houses. It's got a very clear use of the space. It's actually quite a nice design. You can see where they live. They pull out the shops. They pull out where the green spaces are. They've got trees to represent that. It's clear. They say where the childminder lives. There's actually at the bottom a little cat's warning and a little appropriate sign for the road. So it's got quite a lot of little detail in as well, and it's quite comprehensive, and it's really quite stylized, but it's quite a clear expression of their journey and what they can see around them. This is a map I like. It's quite messy. I'm quite a messy person myself. And with a lot of maps, as we saw with the previous one, they identify where their family and friends live. So they draw the house and they identify who lives there. What you don't see on a lot of these maps, or most of these maps, are people. They simply don't put people on. They put the features on, the objects, but they don't actually draw what people look like on them. Colour here has been used to emphasise green spaces. We do actually see trees. We don't always see trees. And there's quite a lot of detail on this map. So whereas Mum Works, or Herbert Mum Works, we actually see kind of a gravelly pavement, but quite a clear understanding of the features that mean something to them. Colour is a thing. A lot of them don't have any colour. I say we tend to find that colour is used to represent things that mean the most to them. So the park and the school got to be very bright orange, but the home also got to be indicated as well. The route is in yellow because that was important to them. This is how they did it. But the houses are quite uniform in appearance. This one is a little bit different. In the kind of more recent batch that I did, I found that some of them got quite expressive with their maps and felt they kind of look quite arty. I call them kind of like abstract art. I found it very interesting that the blank spaces the pupils actually call I don't know or I don't remember. So there's quite a limited understanding, but the things they value, they've coloured in. So the kind of park and the shops is actually a purple dash, but you can quite clearly see where the things that mattered and what they knew was there. So it's a good map, but it has a lot of space in it. And then I have a map, again using colour to identify for them the route. The route was important. So they have a walk route and they have a drive route. Again, both using blue, which is quite calm colour. I suspect they're generally driven because of the way they've identified the car park and the shops. And it uses a slightly different route. They walk less, but this would be their walk route if they were going to do that. So the maps do tell us a lot about their understanding. Pulled in one of my postgraduate researchers' maps because hers was slightly different because it's actually got people on it. So I thought I'll pull it across. So just some general thoughts, most pupils were able to produce these mental maps. They were able to do it in the classroom. I didn't have anybody that threw their pencils down and said they couldn't possibly do it. They have a go. It's something that they recognise and understand. The maps vary in detail and content, and everyone tends to express themselves in different ways and use that space differently. The active travellers tended to focus more on providing footpaths, crossing points, the fields, the woods, the housing, and the traffic lights. I suppose that's their means to get across what can be very busy main roads. Those in cars tended to pull out of road junctions, so they tended to show where they were. They're the ones that have the roundabouts on, because walkers don't use roundabouts. The people driven in cars too. And commercial buildings tended to be more expressed. I suppose there's more likely to do other types of travel if you're in a car because it's easier, it's quicker, it's more accessible. Generally, those shops and parks are usually quite clearly noted. I think children invariably appreciate these and want to mark up those spaces on their maps. So many locate family and friends by the houses that they live in. It is unusual to see people in maps. They do exist, but they are very rare. I've had to use my postgrads to show what they can look like. Most maps don't fill the space up. They think very much about the route that they take and how that affects them and maybe what they see or what they remember seeing. But there, as one young person noted, I don't know or I don't remember. Another thing that gets lost a lot is actually that they'll identify the parks, but the trees get forgotten. They simply don't see them. So even when there's like an alcove of woods, small wooded area, they're simply not seen and they don't get recognised. So I know at least one of the schools I've been to have had large area of trees and they're just not identified on the maps. It's quite interesting to see what they do and don't include. So then kind of finally, active travels were more articulate, we tend to find, in their spatial knowledge. And they're able to put that more legibly across than their peers who travel by car, because they take longer, I suppose, to do their journeys. The kind of cognitive, these mental maps produce a valuable way for our participants to think about how they understand the world around them. And it's nice. There's no assumption that they can write lots. It enables them through the use of pictures and drawings to express how they understand their journey and the opportunities or problems along the way. And it's always very satisfying to take away 30 images and then to go through and see what they've produced and see what things they identify in their journey. I've put some things in the mode shift, thinking about how we get people to travel, but by and large, I'm still collecting my maps. It's so interesting to see how they all interpret differently. It's kind of great fun. Any questions?
Okay, thank you very much for that. That was a really interesting talk and seeing it from the different perspectives. So First things first, I'd like to open up to questions to everyone else, and so yes, it was genuinely interesting seeing the you can see the thought process in people as in the children as they made their maps.
Yeah, they all do it differently, and it's really interesting. I can always tell the ones that get the rulers out and you go, they're going to be engineers. You can just see them, and the architects as well. I have actually worked with children with many challenging behaviours, and I generally find the maps are something that they will engage well with, because it's not about the quality of the work they produce, it's about their journey. And I find that one school I went to had a very high SEN, and I'm going back to them because it was really interesting to see, just to enable young people to have that opportunity to express their journey. And I don't criticize them, I have a lot of fun with them, going through my lecture, getting them to show me where they live. There's so much they can do, and it's really fabulous to be able to do research. Do they produce different maps? If I'm entirely honest, probably not. No, I think because it's at a level where they just express themselves in the way that they want to, and they can just draw me a line, my house, my school, and just tell me what they see, and they can express that in any way they choose.
Okay, now we've actually got some the questions that are started appearing. So the first interesting one is how you work with children with mobility issues and disabilities, and if they do, and if so, do they produce slightly different maps?
I haven't noted. I think it's because I've chosen not in my research to identify if I have students with needs. I am aware that I have students with needs in the classroom, but it's not something that I've pulled out, because that's not what my research is about. I mean, every child that I listen to and work with, their work is equally valid. I am interested in the gender split. I think someone asked me about gender there, didn't they? No, I have no difference with needs. Everyone is open. I think that's the joy of this kind of pictorial work. There isn't a wrong answer.
Okay, good. A good answer for that one. It's and this, I guess, and the next question was, have you seen any difference between the maps of boys or girls? So it's actually
I mean, the work that Ordnance Survey did, 20 years ago, always said that women work better with colour. I have to say, in the classroom, and maybe it's because they're only years 5 and 6, so what they 9, 10, 11, I didn't particularly see any difference. I think the type of person that they're going to be, I can start to see, like the ones that get the rulers out, and I go, that's an engineer. Go and look at an engineering. These should be doing the STEM subjects. They are a different breed. They're really lovely when they get the rulers out, and it's all very precise. It's wonderful. AutoCAD is for you. But then you'll get the ones that are very flouncy and do pictures for me. Some of them are fabulous. I really had some really good plan drawings. I've also, and I haven't particularly talked about this, I have scenescapes where they're almost kind of 3D pictures of the road. So I don't think gender really plays a part. I think it's more about the person that they're going to be that I get a sneaky peek into.
That's quite interesting to see how just as an interesting bit that comes out of the
out of the drawing.
Yes. Okay. So a good question here.
How many maps? As many as I can get. I have to say, I have probably just over 100, and I'm going back into a school. And if you know any schools that want me, it's actually harder to get into the schools post-COVID. So anyone in the South Yorkshire, Derbyshire, Nottingham area who might want me to come and visit them and have links, do get me in. I'll be well game, because it's hard to get into schools at the moment. But when I'm in, they have a fabulous time. They want me back. But it's getting in, it's hard. So as many as I can get. There is other research I'm doing with it as well. I've used the secondary data source from Mode stars, but I'm also interested in doing little histories from the parents, because a lot of travel behaviour is learned. So So I want to find out what the parents did and how their choices were made for their journey to school. So these little biographies from the parents would be really interesting. But I love the map work. The map work is so much fun.
Yes. Following on from that question, do you notice a big difference between the urban and rural environments?
There is a little bit. I mean, Sheffield is quite green, but the primary schools will be more compact. So often there are more buildings, and there is less opportunity for these large green spaces that we get in more rural areas around here. So yes, they can be more detailed because they're closer, and they're often the ones that put. So the one I showed you earlier, so look, there's actually people in it. That was an urban environment.
Wow. Okay. Interesting to see. Right. And how do you see the research feeding into urban planning in the UK?
We need. I mean, there has been. I mean, I have done talks for the RTPI before. It's about getting that better understanding when we do our kind of spatial planning and thinking about how we create space. There's a lot of things we need to do with the new housing estates, because I teach transport as well. We need to think about how we make these active spaces. My research is about active space, but I also want safe route. If it was up to me, all children would have bikes that are entitled to free bus passes, but we give them safe route to the schools, and there's a significant amount of work that needs to be done around safe routes. Secondary schools particularly, rather than give them a bus pass, every year you can give them a free bike and the equipment, and they can cycle their way. It would just be so much healthier. I mean, obviously, if they live 15 miles away, that's a bit of a chore, but most don't. They only live about 3-4 miles away, but it's unsafe. The roads are unsafe. People are unconfident to do that. There is about environmental features as well. We need to think about how we make roads safe. We need to think about pavements, not just creating cycle lanes, because I think that still puts people too close to cars.
Okay, right. So here's one that's come from the society. It's from the society itself. It's do you give the students feedback on their maps to making their map better?
No. I encourage them continually. The staff, because of safeguarding, I always have staff with me. We're there just to get them to create. And their maps, it's their work. There isn't, like I say, there isn't a wrong answer. The only one I once had was he had 2 ways of traveling. I think actually I did use some of his map. He's the one with the car and the scooter, and so he produced me 2 maps in the end. One for when he goes by car and one for when he goes by scooter. But no, we don't. They get a lecture from me at the start about how we create maps. What are those principles? What are the requirements of map making? So they're kind of well versed before they start it. But I don't lead them. No.
Okay, and here's the next question. It's do you tell the children what you wish before the journey, or is it all from memory?
It's from memory.
It's
from memory. So they'll know I'm coming in, and they know I'm going to give a talk about maps. But they won't know what practical work they're going to get, because I want them to just do what that kind of learned memory is. I don't want them to walk in that morning and recite back. It's like doing an exam then, isn't it? I want the memory, that learned memory.
Okay, right, and it's quite interesting to hear that. It's just you probably get a very different result if they knew exactly what they were coming into at that point. Yes, actually, we probably would. But if they're anything like my children, they still wouldn't revise. Yes. Okay. Now this is apologies, I missed the beginning. Are the children given a selection of coloured pens, pencils with their sheets of A4, 3?
Yes.
And
yes.
And it's up to them, it's up to them how they use it.
The schools all have, and they're used to using pencils, crayons, A3. I learnt my mistake when I used to let them do very big sheets and realised I couldn't manage that because there's always two that will. I have a look. You can see me looking at them, and they need to be accessible for me to analyse them and engage with them. But yeah, they have everything they can, and they still refuse to put colour on.
Intriguing that. Okay. Have you looked at their level of understanding of scale, i.e. relative length of nodes and relative positioning?
Not yet. No. I would like to do that. It would be really interesting, probably more on the plan drawings to see if we could pull together what Caroline Wheatley did, who my postgrad researcher. She tried to produce maps, pulling out the themes from the maps from around the schools, and they're quite hodgepodge, but she could actually work out kind of details from the locality and pulled them together, but they are slightly odd looking maps. But when I ultimately have enough and I've scanned them all in, I will try and understand the scale and the points and see if I can get some commonality in the themes.
Okay. So another interesting question is that you have mentioned the difference in awareness between car passengers and cyclists or walkers. Are there any environmental considerations that impact awareness?
I think often with the urban form we found that because there's more housing and it's a lot more densely packed, there are things that often put children about, or things that they get to recognise more. And so with the urban one, we had literally the young person had put dogs barking scares me. So there was kind of that. I think sometimes there's more of a relationship with the urban form and the built form. So you often see things that they remember, or something I often ask them to do is if there's anything that they remember that they don't like, to write that down. But by and large, they get too excited with the big colouring pens and they get going. But some of them do identify things that are important. And I think actually, if you want to know what the environmental concerns they're mostly aware of, it's getting their parks down. Children really value their green spaces, which I'm delighted about. But they're the things that get coloured in more than anything. It's the green space.
That is interesting to hear that. And as I said, yes, one of the places of significant, a place of importance really to a lot of them. And
well, it's great. I mean, I'm pretty sure my kids at 10, 11 were very important about parks.
Right. So we've got a question in 3 parts. So yes. So thank you for your presentation. Very interesting, as it is my field of research too. Let me ask you a few questions. I'll ask them one at a time. So
yes, go on.
Have you checked the relation of sketches content to what they learn at school about maps and mapping?
I think I'm the one that taught them. I think I'm basically the one that gives them, because that's a clear decision on my part, is that I give them a lecture on cartographic principles and requirements. So I know exactly what they're going in with. So I do a little history, and then I go in with and I talk about the Romans and the Greeks, because I want them to think about maps differently and about it being how people or cultures understand their space around them. And I give them that freedom to accept, or to be able to accept that they're valid. How they perceive things is perfectly valid and can be very different from somebody else's. So yeah, the maps and the mapping comes from me just before. So whatever they may have been taught, I know that as they're drawing the maps, they've had the same information as other people that have produced the maps.
Okay, that's interesting there. Second part, is there a correlation or of dominance of linear visualization of travel and a mode of travel while traveling? Driving a car makes us think about a journey as a straight line.
Yeah, there's definitely less detail. It's probably, yeah, I think I did say that, I think the ones that drive have less information. They do have, I can't remember what I said now. It's what they identify with. there's less information, but it tends to, they focus on the commercial buildings, car parks, roundabouts. So more of the road furniture they see because they're sat in a car. And I think it is quite linear in approach and sometimes a little bit, if they're thinking about it, but it often quite blurred as well, because they're just sat in the back of the car, probably switched on, if we're honest. So no, they're never detailed. So it tends to be more of a straight line.
Okay, and the final part. What was the task given to them? To draw a journey may result in pictures, or to draw a map?
They were given freedom. The only criteria they get from me is I say, will you just mark on your map in any way that you like, school, home, and I don't mind where they put it, but it's how they get from one to the other and that's the journey, and it's up to them.
So it's quite very fluid.
It's about their interpretation and how best they want to express themselves.
That's an interesting note. Okay, now have you assessed the spatial accuracy of children's maps? Is there relative positional placement consisting with reality, or is there regular distortion, or the types of maps captured cannot be analysed in this way?
It's really tough to analyse them in that way. I keep all my maps by area, so that ultimately I can sit down and try and work out what I think it's more about, because the accuracy isn't there, and it's not intended to be there, because I want them to kind of draw me their story. But yeah, it would be really interesting at some point to go through. I'll scan them all in and I'll try and make sense of them by pulling out the features that we know to be true and real. And see if I can get an analysis, but I suspect it may be quite dodgy, but it's not really the purpose. As long as things are in some order, I'm kind of happy with that. And it's about the depth of knowledge. It's like, because Kev Lynch did work in the 60s, didn't he, around Los Angeles, and it's actually the level of detail that's more important than actually whether it was correct or not. But a good question.
Okay, and next question here is do the children themselves offer up insights as to why they differ from their peers? Are they surprised? Do their insights differ from your insights?
Honestly, they're quite self-centered at that age, and that it's their work, and and I think it's probably a schooling thing that they only focus on their work. I have to confess, they do get judged as pictures in the class, because I need to motivate them and acknowledge the ones that are particularly good. And it's not because they've been drawn well, but because I really understand what they're trying to say. And we tend to, dojos are a thing now in the classroom. And they the ones that I think are particularly colourful or particularly useful or particularly pretty, then they'll get marks for those. I don't analyse them in the classroom beyond that. And I don't, and it's true that it would be really good to go back, and I do offer up a summary for the schools that they can take back to the classroom and show the parents, but I don't particularly go back to the children, and that would be really good to do, but trying to get into them is really tough at the moment. But that would be, actually, yes, Philip, would be very good if I could get back in and go through what they did and talk to them. But this takes me an afternoon, and that's quite a bit.
I sometimes wonder what would I've been wondering what would happen if you encountered some of the children had done something like the Restless Earth program that the Cartographic Society has. I'd be very interested to see what their maps would look like.
It's, there's no such thing as a bad map. If they've drawn something that generally has had meaning to them, and I appreciate that, and I say I the characters come out. I'm not mocking my engineers. I think they're brilliant, but I can tell exactly who my technicians are going to be. And I can see who's going to be arty and flouncy. But it's a privilege to be able to work with them. And it's been very lovely to share my work with you, or their work with, who am I kidding? Their work with you.
No, absolutely. Thank you very much for all that. It's been very good getting the sight of the work and getting the insights of that you have as that you've been having as well, and it's just very intriguing. And I think we might have one final question. Is that what age group did you say?
So these
were?
are
Youngest to the
usually
oldest?
year 9 to 11.
Mm-hmm.
So it's years 5 and 6 at juniors.
Mm-hmm. Does detail vary between the as they get older, or?
It can do. So the year 5 and 6 will be very similar. When I go into the secondary schools, I would expect them to have a slightly more detailed understanding of their environment.
Mm-hmm.
And there has been work already done around that. So I kind of like years 5 and 6 because they are aware of the environment and they do have an understanding, and they can understand signals and signposts. It'll be slightly different going to year 7 and year 8 because they're that little bit older and have much more awareness of what's around them.
Okay, no, that's all. It's been very interesting, actually. Do
you know, it's a topic. What I like about my topic the most is that we've all done it.
No.
We all traveled to school at some point. It might have been, in my case, a long time ago, but we've all done it.
No, thank you. No, thank you for that. It's been genuinely interesting and a very, very good insight into this. Yes, into this field, which you start to you wonder how much people have looked into it, but it's has been a genuinely very interesting insight. So I'd just like to wind us up now. And so I know I've said it before, but I want to say thank you again for the talk. And I want to thank everyone else for joining us today. It's been a very interesting talk, and I hope people have got quite a bit out of this. Next month's talk will be from Kelly O'Neill with the talk mapping the contents of an atlas of Siberia commissioned by Tsar Peter I in 1696. Very appropriate for Christmas. So so we look forward to seeing you all in the future. But for now, thank you and goodbye.